So today is the exciting culmination of our first annual Curators Fellowship. The Curators Fellowship is a new program that MOHAI is piloting this year, and it invites community and academic historians to bring a new perspective to MOHAI's extensive collections. And today you're going to meet our first Curators Fellow. Brittney Frantece has spent the past few months in our archives analyzing photographs in the Al Smith collection, which tell the story of Seattle's Black community in the mid-20th century for how they demonstrate Black world building in Seattle. Today, Brittney is going to be giving a half-hour lecture on her research, followed by time for questions, and after that, we'll take a quick stretch break and then dive into a half-hour photography analysis workshop. A little bit more about Brittney before I turn over the mic. Brittney's a writer, artist, educator, curator, and PhD candidate in the English department at the University of Washington. She curated queer imaginations at the Jacob Lawrence Gallery in Seattle and Juneteenth Blackness and Freedom at the Beans Gallery in Chicago. In her free time, you can catch her daydreaming about elsewhere or carving linoleum blocks for printmaking. So please give a round of applause for our first Curators Fellow.
Hi everyone, thank you for being here. I'm going to take off my mask so that you all can hear me and see me okay. Is that okay with everyone? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Yes, it was really a great pleasure to go through the Al Smith collection in the MOHAI Resource Center. And I look forward to telling you all a little bit about my research and how I've understood a lot of the materials in that collection. So yes, let's begin. Al Smith Sr. was a beloved and well-known member of Seattle's community who saw photography as both a hobby and a necessity to understanding current moments as the moments of history. His parents immigrated from Jamaica in 1916, and Smith grew up here in Seattle. And as he grew older into teenhood and adulthood, he became really connected to Seattle's small but close-knit Black community. Going through Smith's archive collection at the MOHAI, I was impressed by the amount of photographs, negatives. Oh, sorry, I also meant to change this. There we go. Going through Smith's archive collection at the MOHAI, I was impressed by the amount of photographs, negatives, slideshows, and prints of all sizes that were kept for different reasons. Some prints and slides seem to be for showing what I expect to be a gathering of some kind. You know, friends and families are coming over, so you've got to show them the latest adventure. And there were some proof sheets that I suspect were used for examples for how a shot would turn out before printing it at its full size. Beyond looking at the content of Smith's work and how the images and other documents were stored, and also the images and other documents and how they were stored provoked my curiosity. They were stored in different albums, folders, and containers. And talking with Smith's son, Al Smith Jr., or Butch as the community knows him, it's a shared thought that going through the organization of the material seemed to be a joyful and humorous puzzle in and of itself. We were fascinated by the variety of what was kept, even before we got to the images and the content. In this talk, I'd like to ponder about the wealth and complexity of Smith's archival style, the visceral representation of human emotions, and what it means to build community relationships, and a playfulness in his experimentation. Looking through Smith's work, it is clear. Photographs are not just visual, but are meant to be felt, and leaning into the feeling can take us into the worlds Black people lived. Just some information on this photograph that you see here. This is a photo of Al Smith taking a self-portrait in the middle, in a room, in a mirror. This was around 1953, and if you can see closely in the far corner, there's a small child looking up longingly and lovingly with curious eyes. as they're grinning. It's almost like you can hear the child say, like, "Oh, what are you doing? This looks fun." There's just so much curiosity there, and so much curiosity even in Smith's face too, as he's playing around with the camera and different positions and lighting as well. He takes this photograph with his first professional camera purchase overseas, a World War II, the IcoFlex, a medium format camera. To give a little bit about my background and what influences my research and how I look at Smith's work, I like to offer some information about my overall field of study. My time at the University of Washington involves engaging with and researching Black cultural productions. I'm deeply interested in how Black imaginations create new worlds and show these other worlds in their work. And by other worlds, I mean alternative ways of being, communicating, and relating that allow for Blackness to exist outside of white imaginations. To, quote, marvel in our own inventiveness, to use the words of Black feminist scholar Hortense Spiller. Usually the practice of imagining new worlds and other worlds is left to the work of speculative fiction and sci-fi. Perhaps horror and fantasy can be added too. When we think of imaginative worlds, we think of spaceships, galaxies, maybe even a livable Neptune. And of course, Black speculative fiction and other media like films and music, they do allow us a chance to see and witness Blackness that is not rooted in white supremacy. However, if we exclusively think that Black world building is left up to sci-fi, well, that leads me to think that realistic representation of Black life photography are tied to the representation of Black life as made by the white imagination. In other words, realist representation of Black life are tied to representing Black struggle. And I want to join a lineage of scholars who challenge that idea and insist that Black worlds that don't align with the values of anti-Blackness are constantly being made and lived in by Black people. In my pursuit to analyze and closely read Al Smith's photographs, I'm interested in how Smith shows us world building and other Black worlds by demonstrating the intimate ways of being with friends and family, enjoying the beauty of life, even during moments of protest, being held and embraced with care, and experimenting with art as a way of representing Black life that is out of this world. His photographs show how Black peoples and other peoples in Seattle's communities and beyond built a world for them to be joyous, free in a complicated sense of the term, and filled with sense of community love. A world that greatly oppresses how the anti-Black world likes to imagine Black life. In this photograph here, we see a black and white portrait of Cheryl Smith, Al Smith's daughter, in Seattle around 1958. This image appeared as a proof in the archive, and it was around other images of the family at a body of water with a lot of fog in the images. And so it's more clear in the image proof, but fog is surrounding Cheryl's face. The fog surrounds her soft and calm face. And the photograph to me feels surreal and elegant, almost like it's setting a scene for a sci-fi story to begin. Perhaps a story where Cheryl ushers us into another world. I'd like to move into setting the stage for the academic foundation that influences my work. Also, can you all hear me okay? I know I come in and out of this microphone sometimes. I'd like to move into setting the stage for my academic foundation that influences my work, and as a way to be transparent about who is influencing my world building and archival research thoughts. Much of my research is in ecstatic reading practices of Black cultural works. To define ecstasy as it relates to Black reading practices, I turn to Aliyah Abdurrahman's 2018 essay, The Black Ecstatic, wherein she articulates ecstasy as Black representation practices that work to and intend to, quote, punctuate the awful now with the joys and possibility of the beyond, of alternate worlds and ways. For Abdul Rahman, ecstasy is to be aware of the struggle of the present, but also insist on recognizing and celebrating joy and belonging despite the harm being done in the present time. And here we see the first page of this essay, where you can hear a little bit about her epigraphs that is used, and also a little bit about the beginnings of the argument of thinking about what a Black ecstasy, a Black ecstatic is. Another scholarly influence, one of prominent thought for me, and one whom I'm also influenced by Black diaspora literary scholar Nadia Ellis' 2015 monograph, Territories of the Soul, wherein she indicates that an ecstatic reading practice of Black art requires one to, quote, burrow into the art and feel the sensations from a pool from elsewhere. Feel the sensations of a pool from elsewhere. And elsewhere being the other world that exists somewhere else other than the present moment. Ecstatic reading practices require you to find ways you can place yourself within the artwork and allow it to take you to the world that the art imagines. And here you can see the front cover of the 2015 monograph. Another scholarly influence, and one of prominence for me, and one who we will also revisit for the workshop later, is Black historian, archivist, and literary scholar Saidiya Hartman. Hartman's work visits the archive to make counter-historical narratives of Black families, in particular women, who are housed in the archives that tell racist stories. In her 2007 essay about the archives of transatlantic enslavement, Venus in Two Acts, she writes that the archive is a death sentence because the stories exist are not about the people represented, but rather it's about the, quote, violence, excess, and mendicity. In her work, she consistently identifies a need for more imaginative archival practices that can interrupt the violence of anti-Black archives. These thinkers, amongst many others who seek out other worlds, offer strategies for how to look at photographs for the representational practices that build other worlds for Blackness to exist unhinged. Through looking at Smith's photographs, I'm able to see Black world building as a reality, not just a work of speculation. The way Smith archives and represents the people in his life offers views of Black life that counteract the violence of archival research of Blackness. There is life and liveliness of Black community and familial relationships that are hard to miss in his work. It's hard to focus on Black suffering amongst so much Black joy. Here in this slide, you can see the first image, or the cover of one of Saidiya Hartman's work, and one that we will revisit later, Wayward Lives and Beautiful Experiments, Intimate Histories of Social Upheaval. In short, aesthetic reading practices allow for traditional modes of archiving to be challenged. Traditional modes of archiving presents time as linear and claim to tell a story presented as fact. However, an ecstatic approach to archives thinks of time and temporality as fluid. And in a world like the current material reality that presents Black subordination and inferiority as fact, there needs to be a reckoning with how Black stories are approached in the archive, an approach that carries more imaginative possibilities. To refer back to Abdul Rahman, the Black ecstatic representational practices are, quote, effective and aesthetic practices, and to me that means dealing with feeling and emotional experiences while looking at visual patterns. The Black ecstatic looks at Black past and the promise of liberated Black futures in order to get at new relational and representational modes in the ongoing Black violence. Smith fulfills this promise of showing how Black joy exceeds the flesh and exceeds materiality through the use of capturing all the fun at parties and gatherings, the laughs and expressions his style of portraits and through the use of experimentation. And by seeing the fun, we, in this present moment, are able to transport back to time and experience their world with them. Okay, and so now we can begin really going through some of the archive images that I found really exciting. So when noticing the aesthetic patterns within Smith's body of work, it's clear that Smith's artistic style was to capture the beauty of life, of people during moments of laughter, cries, conversation, annoyances, the beauty of rest, and catching people during authentic motion, during their conversation and other various moods. Capturing people, quote, on the spot, to use his business name that cleverly describes his photographic style. In this image, we see a 4x6 color photograph of Don Alexander and Charlena Mace dancing at the Roots ROOTS family picnic in 1984. Roots is an acronym for Relatives of Old Timers in Seattle, and it started around the 70s as an annual picnic and get together as a way for Seattle's Black communities to come together. Because Seattle increases in Black population as historical events occur, like the war and Great Migrations. Roots is a way for Black families and friends who have been here for a while to connect with the newcomers. In this photograph, I simply love seeing the dance moves, getting really low, the knees working. It's almost like I can, even though it's a still photograph, I can see and sense the motions between two people having fun. And I can only imagine the music that is playing. Perhaps there's a band that's there, a live band that's there, or perhaps somebody's playing records. It's just fun to see this joy here. This is another 4x6 photograph of people dancing at another Roots family picnic around 1985. And they're probably doing the electric slide because whenever Black people come together, there will be an electric slide, maybe 5. And I think that this also shows something about geography as well, and troubling traditional geographies, because newcomers were coming in from all over the United States, all over the nations, to come to this one place in Seattle. And despite geography, despite where people are from, we all know the steps to the electric slide, and we will not be hesitant to join in the community and dance with everyone. Smith had an interesting and experimental take on portraiture. People in his photographs aren't always posing with straight backs or at an angle that is facing front towards the camera, though there are some moments like that, but I like to focus on the portraits that are more experimental. This photograph is of an unidentified woman posed for the Clique Club fashion show around 1965. And I love this image because we can see the camera is slightly skewed a little bit, tilted as she softly smiles and focuses her attention away from the camera lens and to something or someone that is out of the camera frame. This style of portraiture leads us to wonder what or who is in the room that has her attention while being photographed. And such curiosity can take us back into that place. His portraits have a close-up shot of people right in the middle of saying something, laughing or expressing frustration. We can see that here in this 4x6 color photograph of an unidentified person attending a Roots family picnic around 1985. Although we can see her eyes are looking into the camera, looking towards Smith, probably, we can see that her expression shows that she's fully in the middle of a conversation, perhaps with Smith. perhaps sharing about her experience so far at the picnic, or perhaps catching up with the latest friend stories. Overall, I like to see this still image of somebody that's in motion, that is in conversation. It makes me wonder, what is the conversation about? And it helps me understand that and with photographs, there's something that's always going on in the moment. So we're not just taking a still moment in time, but we're looking at something in action. In this way, we are able to get a sense of the visceral feeling of the person during the time of the photograph. Then the viewers, like me and you all, and other people witnessing his work, we are able to vicariously feel these expressed emotions, transcending the materiality of the moment, or transcending time, as well as transcending the emotion only affecting that individual, because it affects us as well. This is another photograph of a person attending the Roots family picnic around 1985. And what I think is really interesting is that this person in the archive, although unidentified, there's the name tag is just right outside of the frame. And well, what I think is interesting that many scholars point at with aesthetic world building is this idea of being elusive, being unknown, and how unknowability is a form of protection, a way to protect these other worlds. And so I think it's quite fascinating that the name tag is right out of the frame as it speaks to world building. But also something else really interesting is the expression, again, right in the middle of saying something. We see eyebrows raised, we see lips perched. Maybe he was in the middle of a very thought-provoking conversation. Perhaps somebody asked him a question, or perhaps he was ready to ask a question. Seeing facial expressions in the moment allows for such curiosity and wondering that I like to linger on to as valuable information. The way Smith captures expressions, I'm able to feel what the one being photographed is possibly feeling. Even if my emotions aren't exactly the same as theirs, my emotions are in response to their emotions that are captured. Here we see another image of an unidentified person at a Roots family picnic, again around 1985. And we see her mouth wide open and maybe laughter, or maybe she's speaking ecstatically or loudly. Every time I see this, I can't help but to laugh too in response to this image. It's almost like I'm laughing at the imagined sound of her laughter. And it's almost as if I can hear her now, and thinking about that imagined voice is transcending space and time. Experimentation is key to world building. Because world building requires distorting and playing with normative practices, Smith seems to be a fan of experimentation, which helps us understand ecstatic Black representational practices, because it moves away from traditional photography styles and methods. In many images, he experiments with exposures, having an image be overexposed with a flood of light obscuring the subject, or underexposed with darkness being the main thing we notice. Here in this photograph, we see a black and white photograph of an unidentified model who sits in a chair and softly grins at the camera. A flood of light comes in from the left side of the frame, and it hides a lot of her body except for the side arms, shoulders, and the face. It's almost as if the light is about to swallow the image. It adds a softness there. It softens the image in some ways, an image that's already soft. Smith also experiments with camera steadiness and movements. He was not always interested in capturing still moments, but seemed to let the shutter stay open to capture the blurriness caused by, to show the blurriness caused by movements. In this small 2x3 black and white photograph is a portrait of a woman standing on the steps in front of a house around 1938. This image was in a book of a time a young Al Smith traveled across the Pacific on the SS President Grant and bought his Icoflex. We can see the movement in the dress and shirt as her body stands still on the steps. The blurriness has a surreal and ghostly effect. Smith also experimented with double and multiple exposures of prints from seemingly two different time periods. This double exposure is seen in his actual prints and in the storing of negatives. So some negatives in the archive were placed on top of each other, appearing as a double exposure in the negative format. By taking different photographs together, even from different moments in life, Smith imagines another way of recounting history and telling a story of the present moment. Again, time is warped, and therefore aesthetic practices are being represented with multiple exposure photographs. This is a colored photograph, and it's a double exposure of Isabel Smith, Al Smith's wife, in Lake Washington around 1985. Both of these moments were taken at different times, but by printing them together, we are seeing two distinct moments in time happen simultaneously. In Smith's world, time can be played with. An experimentation practice of Smith's that I'm fascinated with is the hand color prints. There are a series of Smith's earlier photographs around 1940s and 50s where they are printed on large format black and white image paper. They are printed on large format and matte paper. Smith hand colors them in. The level of intimacy and imagination involved in re-remembering the past through the imagination leaves me in awe and curiosity. Hand coloring prints requires patience and practice. You can do it with watercolor, oil, coloring pencils, or acrylic. There was like a stack of them in a folder, and there was many that weren't colored in, so there were multiple copies of each photograph. And each hand-colored print was imagined differently, had different colors to them, different shades, almost as if different materials. Maybe some were with acrylic and maybe some were with oil or coloring pencils. So he would imagine hair or other clothing in different colors. And this practice demonstrates the imaginative process of retelling history in a different narrative. In the hand-colored prints, the color bleeds outside of the lines. This demonstrates aesthetic practices as Smith's creativity exceeds the space that is allotted. In this photograph, we see Hazel Scott at the piano on October 11, 1947. Scott was a well-known artist who refused to play for segregated audiences, which helped usher in Black rights, human and civil rights as it relates to Black music scene in Seattle during the 40s and 50s. With these color prints, I see Smith paying homage and honoring Scott through this creative and intimate process. Smith's entire archival process honors experimentation. When I dove into his archive collection, I sought out organizational methods that were familiar to me. Like I was looking for a chronological order, or by subject matter, by print size, or even by occasion. And what I found was a mixture of all of these categories. Each container seemed to have a way of organizing separate from other containers, as if each container held a logic, a grammar, or a way of organizing that is true for that container. While inside of the container, the flow is easy to understand. For example, a container may hold only Basin Street performances of different sizes, while another container holds 4 by 5, 6 photographs of nightclubs, while a container next to it holds large format photographs from many different situation scenarios. Smith's experimentation when it comes to organizing archiving confronts traditional modes of archiving. It brings a new life to the world of archiving information and allows for an organizational method that is governed by spontaneity and perhaps feeling. Feeling, affect, when it comes to archiving, invites invented patterns. Trusted inventions, trusting that one's own rhyme and reason is justified, is a crucial element to building alternative worlds. The vastness of Smith's collection is also informative when it comes to pondering about how we can create new worlds. There is so much kept in his collection that it seems as though very little was discarded. This brings up the question of vastness, complexity, and honoring imperfection as much as perfections, which are all crucial when thinking about world building. In other words, it seems like very little was discarded, and it seemed as though everything could and should be honored as a process. Honored for its right to exist. Every photograph should be honored for its right to exist. Here we see small black and white photographs of Al Smith on the SS President Grant around 1938 on a passenger ship. He was a member of the Marine Cookson Steward Association of the Pacific Coast. This series was kept in an old and delicate photo album with clean, small photographs from his Icoflex from almost about a century ago. In each of these photographs, we can see a young Al Smith enjoying life, traveling, and making new friends. All things that were reoccurrent, that were consistent throughout his entire collection. Just gonna take a pause for some water. What is clear about Smith's work is a love for community. The Smith family was known in the community for their social life. Smith's photographs show decades of celebrating getting together with Black friends and families at other people's home. A good old house party. Love to see it. It was a way to experience Black joy without experiencing the harassment of people with anti-Black ideologies. And while in a conversation with Stephanie Johnson Tolliver, the president of the Black Heritage Society, we talked about the comfort level that was involved in the house parties as opposed to going out with nightclubs. It was a way to feel at ease with their Black cultures and phrases and accents and more. Although Smith's photographs captured a wide range of cultural life in the Central District and all throughout Seattle, there is a quite bit of images that portray Black belonging. A key element of Black cultural productions and ecstasy, as Abdurrahman puts it, is looking at the community relations that build the other worlds. In this large print 8x10 black and white photograph, we see friends gathered around enjoying each other on a couch around 1945. Though they seem to be posed for the camera and that they're all in front of the camera and they're sitting on the couch, they don't just focus on Smith. They continue to talk and laugh with each other. They embrace each other, lean into each other. They are too enthralled with each other to only focus on the one taking the photograph. In this moment, we see Black community in action. We see a whole world engaging in this room. I do love to see in this photograph, like people embracing each other, leaning in on each other, to huddle together. Some are posed for the camera, maybe two are looking up at the camera, but the rest are just seeming to enjoy each other. We see another black and white photograph of people on a stair, possibly going to a house party or part of a house party in 1944. Again, we see closeness and bonding. By burrowing into the art, we can see and experience the love and care that is shared in this moment. House parties continue to be a way for close-knit Black communities in Seattle to remain close while the Black population was increasing. The house parties had a tradition. People were monthly regulars to stay involved in the community and also brought newcomers to Seattle to welcome them in to the close-knit community. I'm fascinated that such bonding seemed to happen quite often in the private homes of friends and families, as opposed to clubs. But that is not to say that Black people and friends and families did not get down at the nightclubs. Seattle is very well known for the music scene, being home to many loved and respected musicians such as Ray Charles. Many popular musicians would come to segregated clubs on Jackson Street, like the Basin Streets and Black and Tan. And through the music, celebration, and dancing, Smith was there in the front row and to capture the action. He was often on the stage with the artists or taking close-up shots of them, belting their voices into the microphone. The horn players are moving all about the scene, all captured by Smith's eye for capturing the fun of the moment. In this photograph, we see a dimly lit photograph that is again experimenting with lighting and exposure. A couple is dancing with each other. And they seem too into the music, too into each other, too into the dance move, to notice that their joy is being captured. And this was around 1945. These images were archived as negatives that were digitized as positive of the Basin Street nightclub around 1948. This gray box is of a child that was on the toilet, and although I love Smith's non-traditional organization and flow, this image seemed too personal to show. But I wanted to show the other images of bands playing in the very popular nightclub. We see images of a full band that was compact and snugly together on a stage with a wooden small fence in front. We see people walking around across the stage, in front of them, dancing and waiting for the bands to appear. In all, we see Black people out in the world and in their own worlds, ready to experience Black music and culture. This image, stored as a negative and digitized as a positive, of a performer dancing at the Rocking Chair nightclub around 1945. It screams ecstasy for me, and when I first saw it, I had to gasp. In the negative, I don't know if you all can see it, but in the negative, the head looks like it's replaced with a burst of light, coming from the body to fill the room. Now, that might not be what literally happened. Could you imagine being with a dancer or being at a club and a dancer pulls off their head and a burst of light comes in? That would be a joy. But that is what I feel like I'm experiencing when I look at this negative. This image speaks of experiencing ecstatic dancing. body movements to sounds of drums, horns, strings, vocals all at once, aiding in what it means to visually represent ecstatic feeling. Feeling outside of and larger than the body, the flesh, the material world. Feeling this Black ecstasy is what helps build Black worlds. And also, like, even in the positive, I believe there's a hat that this person is wearing, but the hat covers their head and the neck. So even in the positive, it still looks like the head is replaced. There are other themes within Smith's collection that I didn't touch on that I think are worth mentioning because they seem very important in his vast body of work. Towards Smith's later career as a photographer, there are photographs of nature and being outside in some of the gardens around Seattle and other places that he and his family would travel, like East Asia. There's significant interest in rest, like taking photographs of family members and strangers sleeping in their beds and on beaches. This work contributes to conversations about Black rest and how it is important for Black people to discuss what it means to not be part of a capitalist mode of production. It is also obvious that Smith was a lover of sports. Not only is there a whole album dedicated to famous basketball players during the 70s, but there are also Black and white photographs of local boxers and local softball players. And this image I thought was so funny when I came across it, is of a bush of flowers along the Elliott Bay around 1990. And I thought it was so wonderful because I live around the Elliott Bay area and I go walking on that trail so often. And I literally have a Polaroid of this exact bush. And so I just thought that moment just transcended time for me. So there's that. And yes, that concludes the lecture portion of this workshop. I hope you all enjoyed it, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you. If you have a question, raise your hand and I will come around with the mic so that we can make sure we get your question on the recording.
I know just left on Monday, but the Ansel Adams juxtaposition, the last part of that exhibit, which had the pictures I think that you had taken out of archive. There was a link to the archive that people can go and look at the other pictures. Is that still active? Because I think there's a QR code or something you can look at pictures in the archive. Is it open to the public to look at?
The Ansel Adams one?
No, not that one. The pictures from the Black Past or the Historical Society. It's a MOHAI
Yes.
collection.
Yes, it's still on the MOHAI website. It's still, just a sec. My coworker who knows even more.
Are you asking specifically about the photos that were part of the Perspectives on Place exhibit, or generally about photos?
I saw those, but at the end, I thought you could, I actually did take a picture of the code or something and went to the site, but now I can't find it, but I did. But there were a lot of pictures in the archive. I just don't know if it's still available for us to just look at as a public.
MOHAI has on our website, we have as many photos as have been digitized available to search through, but that is a tiny portion of everything we have in the collection. So I believe everything from that second portion of the exhibit, Perspectives on Place, should be online in addition to many of the Al Smith photos, although not all of them.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah, and I believe if you go to our website where it says collection, then you can go to, there's a portal and then you can search. So if you want to specifically see the Al Smith collection, you search that in the portal, it should bring them up. Very good, thank you.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say in response to your question, because I think the code there in Perspectives on Place also guided you to King County Snapshots, where the Black Heritage Society
Yes, that's what it was.
has a selection of images as well. And of course, we don't have as many digitized as MOHAI, but we're really working on it to make that happen because it's a really rich collection. Thanks for that. asking about.
Yeah, do you have any volunteer opportunities for kids to help with
Well,
digitization?
Oh, yes, let me get out my.
No, it's a good
Yes,
project,
please,
right?
please, contact us and,
Okay.
we can
Yeah, find
connect
you.
here and help,
Okay.
yeah, help you figure that out. And, just really quickly too, Brittney, thank you so much for the conversation we had the other day, and, I love the work that you're doing and bringing, Al Smith's collection to light even more. It's the collection that just keeps on giving, right, Howard?
Okay.
And I saw today some images that I have not seen. I'm really anxious to get back to collections and start digging myself. The hand colored, I had no idea those were there. So just really beautiful. And thank you.
Mhm. Yes, the hand colored image, and there's different images as well. Like, so there's a lot of copies, but there's like maybe 4 or 5 images that he worked to hand color.
Well, Brittney, I really appreciate your fresh perspective on the collection. It's a great presentation you've made. And
Thank
I'm
you.
just curious about your process. Were you able to just be alone with the photos and flip through pages and take notes and enjoy?
Yeah, so thank you for that question. My process is I like to remain ecstatic. And so it is an eye for experimentation. So it's almost like I go in as a blank slate. Like, so when I started this, I asked, like, I want to see everything. Like, I just pull things out. And because I wanted the images to guide me, I wanted the collection to guide me. And as I was going through the process, or if I saw an image and it spoke to me, I would ask it questions. I would be curious about, like, what about this image is speaking to me, and what is it telling me about Black life in that moment, and life in general, because there's so many images that spoke about protests. There was a lot of gay pride protests in Seattle during the time, a lot of garden and picnics, tea parties, and so all of these images, I allowed them to speak to me, and I was just open. So I didn't necessarily have like a hard process, like, okay, I'm gonna go do this and then that and this, but it was more freer, and I let the collections guide me. I let the images guide me. Thank you.
So as you're speaking about the building the other world, I think I reflected on this book that I got a hold of called Unseen. Have you seen that? From the archives, I think, of the New York Times, of photographs of African Americans joyfully living life, and they were never ever published because it showed the opposite image of what people wanted Black life to look like. So it's a wonderful book. It's still available, but it does pull out all the joyful family moments, dressing up, going to church, just a cultural piece that all showed just smiles and happiness. So it's a shame that people want to archive that versus bring it forward, but it was a really good book that was published, I think, about 4 years ago. So thanks for doing more of this.
Yes, and thank you. Thank you for bringing that into the conversation. I love seeing work like that. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Brittney, for your presentation today. I can only agree with Stephanie and Howard, that it really is wonderful to see your exploration of the Al Smith collection and also to bring in the ecstatic world-building perspective. One of the things I found really interesting that you were discussing was authentic motion and how you see that in the collection, and really enjoyed the instances you brought up, but was wondering if you could maybe speak a bit more to how you're seeing that in the collection.
Sure. Well, I think authenticity was really abundant. And I see that mostly in what I might call experimentation. So perhaps I see it as experimentation, but maybe Smith saw it as being authentic. Because there were a lot of things that didn't go across or didn't perform in the way that I am taught and trained how a photograph should look, how a photographer should hold the shutter or the lighting and all of that. And I challenged that thought. I challenged the it shouldn't be this way, to well, what is this difference communicating? And how it is allowing me to that challenging that is allowing me to see how things were in Smith's imagination and in his world that he captured in his photographs. And to me, that's exploring the authenticity, not putting a narrative onto an image, but allowing myself to be curious about the many ways it's speaking. I hope that answers your question. Does it?
It did, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for this wonderful work. I'm curious about who Smith saw as his audience. As a white person looking at this work, it reveals an aspect of the Black community that I have struggled to be aware of, and I wonder to what extent Smith sees me and white people like me as his audience versus the Black community that he's portraying.
I think in a lot of ways, a question of audience, because it almost seems as though, in my brain I'm wanting to ask, maybe Smith was his audience. I think he captured or did photography often as a hobby and as a way to capture his historical moments. And I think that it's almost as if he wanted his friends, his family, himself to witness what he was experiencing, and perhaps even the people who he was photographing, he wanted them to witness how he was experiencing them. It seems, I could be speculating. But I think that, I'm unsure if, Smith was thinking like, I want to change how white people are seeing Blackness and Black people. And I think it was more of, I want to photograph and show the people that I'm closest to enjoy each other. Does that answer your question? I hope so. Thank you.
Any other questions before we move to the workshop portion?
Thank you, Brittney. I appreciate seeing these photographs as well. My first question, probably my own question, is were there any comparisons that you drew in your mind to seeing things from the 1930s and 40s and 50s and then literally being in 2022 and what could be here or is not here or could be exactly the process?
Similarities. I think that could be why I was so drawn to the house parties. Because I am a lover of house parties, and I do think that that's just something that is very present. The way that Black people, because I feel like I'm a large part of Black communities, I enjoy going to house parties by my peers, by people who I'm close to and friends with. And in these house parties, we're able to commune and build together. We're able to talk with each other, experience each other. And going back to this idea of authenticity, there's a way that I can be authentic and plot schemes with people in these house parties in ways that I'm not able to do when I'm out in public, which doesn't mean that I don't enjoy a good, concert. But there was something, I thought a lot about the house party aspects and what is made possible. And there was a lot of similarities that I noticed as people were on top of each other, hugging each other. As I look back to photographs of my home and where I used to go to house parties all the time, it looked very similar. Me and my friends were all on top of each other, talking with each other as pictures were being taken. So that's one of the similarities I see. Thank you for your question.